Have you ever felt the room change when you spoke your mind? Not because you were rude, or loud, or wrong, but because you refused to nod along. You watch the smiles fade, the eyes shift away, the conversation shrink into something shallow and safe. They say you're arrogant. They say you're too intense, too much. But maybe the truth is, you are simply unwilling to wear the mask everyone else has agreed to keep on. You don't laugh at the jokes you don't find funny. You don't pretend to admire what you see as empty. You don't bend yourself into shapes just to be liked. And in a world where comfort matters more than truth, that makes you dangerous. Not because you are a threat to their safety, but because you are a threat to their illusions. And here's the part no one will say out loud. The moment you stop playing along, you stop being one of us. You're no longer harmless, not because you've done anything violent, but because you've made an unspoken choice to see and to say what others would rather keep hidden. People don't reject you after careful debate. They don't weigh your words against the facts. They reject you in an instant, in the subtle tightening of the jaw, in the way their eyes slide to someone else, in the sudden shift of the conversation into safer waters. You've seen it in the office. In a meeting, you raise a point no one wants to touch. Something about the numbers not adding up, about a decision that doesn't make sense. The room goes still. A colleague clears their throat. Someone changes the subject with a joke, and everyone laughs a little too quickly. You've seen it with friends. You mention a truth they've been avoiding about their relationship, their habits, their compromises. They smile tightly and say, "You think too much." And in that moment, the warmth in the room shifts. You've stepped outside the invisible circle. Psychologists call this the mirror effect. When you stand beside someone physically stronger than you, you don't feel that your very self is being challenged. You might even admire them. When you meet someone wealthier, you might feel envy, but it doesn't shake your sense of who you are. Intelligence, though, intelligence is different. It's not something you can politely admire from a distance. It goes straight to the core of a person's identity. We define ourselves by what we think, by what we believe is true, by how we see the world. So when you meet someone who thinks deeper, sharper, clearer, someone who questions the very things you've built your identity on, it doesn't just challenge your ideas, it unsettles your sense of self. That's why intellectual depth provokes a discomfort no other form of superiority can. The deep thinker doesn't have to speak. They don't have to prove anything. Their mere presence is a reminder that there's more to see, more to know, more to question. And for most people, that reminder is unbearable, because once you see yourself in that mirror, you can't unsee the cracks. And most people will break the mirror before they face what it shows. And this is where Nietzsche would step in, not with sympathy, but with a warning. He would tell you, of course they turn away. That is exactly what the herd must do. Nietzsche saw what most people never dare to admit, that societies are not built to celebrate independent minds. They are built to protect the values of the majority. And the majority is not made of visionaries. It is made of those who survive best by staying together. Picture it. You walk into a room of old friends. They're laughing, relaxed, telling the same stories you've all heard before. And then, without thinking, you say something that challenges the way they've always lived. Not even to provoke, just to be honest. Suddenly, the air shifts. The smiles freeze for a second. Someone changes the subject. And in that instant, you're no longer one of us. Nietzsche called this slave morality, a moral code designed by the powerless to protect themselves from those who are stronger, sharper, freer. In slave morality, humility is a virtue, obedience is goodness, and questioning the rules is the gravest sin. This is why the herd doesn't just ignore you. It works to pull you back in line. And if you refuse, it brands you dangerous. But Nietzsche didn't stop there. He named another force: resentment, the quiet, bitter hostility of those who feel small but cannot admit it. Resentment turns envy into moral judgment. It lets the mediocre tell themselves that the higher, sharper, stronger life is not admirable, but evil. It whispers, they are selfish, they are arrogant, they think they're better than us. And so, the herd learns to fear the wolf, not because the wolf harms them, but because the wolf proves the flock is optional. Nietzsche believed the true thinker is not merely an observer of the world. They are a revaluer of all values, someone who looks at what the herd calls good and dares to ask, good for whom? Good for what? And once you see that, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to believing that the rules were handed down from the heavens for everyone's benefit. You know now that most virtues were designed for control, not for truth. That is why the herd will never truly forgive the deep thinker. Because once you've exposed the script, no one can pretend it's the truth anymore. And if you think this is just theory, history will prove you wrong. Nietzsche's insight that the herd protects itself by crushing those who stand apart is written in the lives of the greatest minds we've ever known. Nietzsche himself. In his lifetime, he was dismissed as a madman. His books barely sold. Friends drifted away, unable to stomach his relentless questions. Critics called him incoherent, dangerous, insane. And yet, what had he done? He had dared to say that morality was not handed down from heaven, but manufactured on earth, often to keep the strong in chains. It would take decades after his death for the world to understand. Socrates, the man who asked Athens the most dangerous question of all, why do you believe what you believe? He walked the streets, speaking to anyone, dismantling the lazy certainties of priests, politicians, and merchants. And for this, for the crime of teaching people to think, he was tried, condemned, and made to drink poison. His final act was not apology, but defiance. The unexamined life is not worth living. Galileo, by proving the earth revolved around the sun, he shattered the theological order that had ruled for centuries. The church, threatened by the collapse of its cosmic authority, forced him to kneel and deny the truth. He spent his final years under house arrest, a prisoner, not for what he did, but for what he refused to stop believing. Hypatia of Alexandria, a woman philosopher and mathematician in a male-dominated ancient world. She taught scientific reasoning and questioned religious dogma. For that, a mob dragged her through the streets and murdered her. Her death was not about faith or science. It was about control. She was living proof that knowledge can bloom where tradition says it should not. Alan Turing, the codebreaker, whose genius helped end World War II. His work saved millions of lives and laid the foundation for modern computing. But society could not accept who he was. For the crime of being himself, he was chemically castrated. 2 years later, he was dead by his own hand. The herd will take your service, but never forgive your difference. Vincent van Gogh. He painted visions no one else could see, with colors that seemed torn from the edges of dreams. In his lifetime, he sold almost nothing. He died in poverty, convinced he was a failure. Today, his work hangs in the most celebrated galleries in the world. The herd can only love you when you are safely gone. These were not criminals. They were truth-tellers, and yet the herd treated them as threats, because each of them did what Nietzsche demanded of the thinker. They revalued all values. They refused to accept that good meant obedience. They refused to call the cage a home. And here's the cruel irony. Every age thinks it would have welcomed these people. We tell ourselves, I would have defended Socrates. I would have stood with Galileo. I would have read Nietzsche when he was alive. But the truth? Most of us would have been in the crowd calling for their silence. Because the herd doesn't change as quickly as the world changes, and the one who sees too far ahead is always, in their own time, a stranger. If the pattern in history feels familiar, it's because it's still happening. And psychology explains why. When someone threatens the story you live by, your brain doesn't treat it like an interesting debate. It treats it like danger. Neuroscientists have found that when people feel intellectually threatened, the amygdala, the brain's fear center, lights up, just as it does when we sense physical danger. This is why deep ideas feel so unsettling to so many. It's not a matter of agree or disagree. It's survival. You've seen it happen at work. Someone questions the company's official reason for a decision. The conversation tightens. Eyes dart toward the manager. People shift in their seats. It's not about whether the question is valid. It's about the fact that asking it risks breaking the shared illusion everyone relies on to feel safe. You've seen it at the dinner table. A relative challenges a family tradition, pointing out that it never really made sense. The laughter dies. Someone quickly changes the subject. The ritual is defended, not because it's right, but because letting it go would unravel too much. And you've seen it online. Post an uncomfortable truth and watch what happens. People won't just argue. They'll attack you. They'll try to discredit you. They'll tell you you're overcomplicating things, all because you forced them to see what they've worked hard to avoid. Nietzsche understood this before neuroscience gave it a name. He saw that the herd doesn't protect its beliefs because they are true, but because those beliefs hold the herd together. Questioning them is dangerous because, for most of human history, to be cast out of the group was to die alone. Modern psychology even names the tricks the mind uses to avoid this threat. Status quo bias, the preference for the familiar, even when it's harmful. The backfire effect, when confronted with proof we're wrong, we double down instead of changing our minds. The Dunning-Kruger effect, the less we know, the more certain we feel. Now run these through Nietzsche's lens. The less someone truly knows, the more confident they feel in defending the very values that keep them small. The more someone depends on the herd for their identity, the more they will see a value questioner as a threat, not just to ideas, but to their existence. And here's the sting. The more clearly you see, the more your very presence forces them to confront what they've been avoiding. You don't have to say a word. You've already broken the spell. This is where Nietzsche's resentment comes alive. That quiet, simmering hostility from those who feel small but can't admit it. It turns envy into moral judgment. It lets people tell themselves they're arrogant. They think they're better than us. They're dangerous. This is why the wolf image matters. The wolf doesn't attack the flock to be cruel. It simply lives by a different code. But the sheep can't see that. To them, difference itself is danger. Nietzsche would say, this is the cost of being a revaluer of values. You don't just disagree with the herd. You expose that their moral laws are not eternal truths, but fragile agreements held together by fear. And once someone sees that, they can never look at the world the same way again, which is why the herd will do anything, twist facts, rewrite history, even paint the truth teller as a monster to keep that moment of clarity from spreading, because they cannot unhear you, and they will never forgive you for it. The problem was never that you were too much. The problem was that they were never enough. They told you you're hard to understand, but you are not. You simply refuse to speak the language of the herd. They told you you're arrogant, but you are not. You simply refuse to kneel. They told you you're too much, but you are not. You simply refuse to pretend. Society doesn't just reject those who think differently. It resents them. It needs to resent them, because resentment is the glue that holds the mediocre together. Nietzsche would tell you, the herd does not forgive those who walk away, because your absence is proof they could have walked away too. They will call you selfish for refusing to serve their illusions. They will call you dangerous for refusing to obey their fears. They will call you broken for refusing to break yourself to fit their mold. They will tell each other, you failed, not because you did, but because they need you to. And here's the truth. They will never admit. Every insult they throw is not a wound. It's a confession of the cage they live in and their terror of the door being open. The more they accuse you of arrogance, the more they reveal their dependence on submission. The more they accuse you of being lost, the more they reveal their terror of the road ahead. They will say you've changed. And you have. You've stopped being what they needed you to be. They will say you've abandoned them. And you have. You've abandoned the game they begged you to keep playing. This is the part they cannot forgive. That you found the key in your own pocket, and you chose to unlock your own chains. Sheep will always fear the lone wolf, not because the wolf hunts them, but because the wolf proves the flock is optional. And here's the deeper truth. They do not hate you because you are wrong. They hate you because you are right too soon. Too soon for their comfort. Too soon for their courage. Too soon for the fragile world they built out of borrowed beliefs. And every time they try to pull you back, remember this. They are not trying to save you from falling. They are trying to save themselves from seeing how high you can climb. So what now? After all this, after knowing what you know, how do you live in a world that fears you for seeing too clearly? You do not survive the herd's judgment by begging for its forgiveness. You survive by becoming someone who no longer needs it. Nietzsche never told the free spirit to win the herd's approval. He told them to climb higher, high enough that the noise below becomes nothing but wind in the distance. That means learning to stand alone without collapsing in on yourself. To find in solitude not a sentence, but a sanctuary. Take the walk alone, not because you have no one, but because you choose the clarity that comes when no one is pulling you back. Keep the notebook. No one else will read. Let your sharpest thoughts live where they cannot be diluted. In a world addicted to applause, be willing to do the work that earns none. The herd survives by numbers. The thinker survives by depth. And depth is built in the hours no one else will share with you. Find the few who understand without asking you to shrink. They may be scattered, but they exist. In quiet corners of libraries, in late-night conversations, in the unspoken nod between those who have walked the same lonely road. And if those few do not come quickly, become your own company. Nietzsche's word for this was self-overcoming, the act of remaking yourself again and again until you are no longer a product of the herd, but the author of your own code. That is the work of the Übermensch, the one who steps beyond, not a tyrant, not a ruler, but a creator of values that do not require the herd's permission. And here's the truth the herd will never tell you. The day you stop fearing exile is the day you stop being theirs and start being your own. When you walk back into the crowd, you will see it differently. You will see the invisible strings they pull on each other, the games they pretend are reality, and you will know you are no longer part of it. Their chains are no longer your problem, and your freedom is no longer theirs to take. If you've come this far, you already know you were never meant to be understood by everyone. And that's not a flaw. It's the clearest sign you are walking a road most will never set foot on. Nietzsche would tell you, the mountain path is narrow for a reason. The higher you climb, the fewer you will meet. But those you do meet, they are worth more than 1,000 voices in the valley. You are not here to be swallowed by the crowd. You are here to build something the crowd could never imagine. And maybe you don't see it yet, but every step you've taken, every chain you've broken, has been shaping you into that creator. So keep walking. Leave the door open for the few who can walk beside you. And when you find them, you will know this right here is one of those rare places. If these words spoke to you, leave something here. Even one line, even one word, because somewhere, someone else will read it and know they are not alone either. If you want more spaces like this, spaces the herd will never make for us, then help me make them. Share this. Stay close. Come back. And when you step back into the noise, remember this. You are not theirs. You are your own, and no one can take that from you.